Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest guest session series of ValuesJam. George, it's brilliant to have you here. And why don't you start by introducing yourself and your great work?
Thank you so much, Alan. I'm George Ochieng, married. I have two daughters. So one of them just joined high school recently, one of the most prestigious schools in Kenya called Kenya High School. She happened to have been one of the best performers in the top 10 category against a population or other candidates, 1.2 million. Wow. It's been amazing. And that, of course, really builds on what I've also been doing over time. I've been working with young people as a career coach, which started way back in the year 2000 when I used to live in some neighborhood near city center. And every evening I would see that my neighbor was a bit concerned about the performance of their son at the time. And so I got curious and decided to befriend the young man. And of course, I also sought the permission of his parents, if we could just sit with him, encourage him, but of course, practically just sit and encourage him through his studies. And so the young man at the time was in the bottom 10 in a class of around 100. And when we started the program, the following term, he jumped to actually be among the first 10. And so that became good news. So we became good friends. But it all started just by, looking at those skills that I got from high school. I performed averagely, and that affected me for some time. But in between, I remember going somewhere to city center, and my former classmate asked me, George, where do you teach these days? I said, hey, guy, we just finished high school recently. I'm not a trained teacher. I said, no, you used to be good at teaching. I said, how did you know that? And you were classmates. He said, yeah, we used to see you when you were teaching as literature. So that was the evidence that, yes, I had some skills of teaching or tutoring. And the following year, they had got a word of mouth. Another parent came to me, and we also helped his son that had also been abandoned by even the best tutors in the neighborhood. Once again, the boy or the young man performed exceptionally well. And so fast forward, the third year, and the fourth year, I picked on yet another young man who was also an average learner, but he became one of the best. In fact, that year, he was one of the best candidates in Kenya. I remember buying a newspaper in my rural, a town. And I remember earlier on, as you're going through the motions of study, I'd encourage our colleague that I don't want to call mom and dad to inquire about your performance, just want to buy a newspaper. And so I just actually bought a newspaper and it was there. So incidentally, it's the same young man who is now a peer because he's now one of the senior media personalities here in Kenya. And that marked my trajectory or the turning point of my coaching dynamics. But then the parents or guardians that lent me to take on the same young people at high school level. So again, I started this, but I also got a friend which lent me not to do it alone. So I mobilized the team. And so we started doing this now as a community. And so once again, I would get average learners, probably grade C minus or maybe E. And within a term, I would see them transform and perform well in class. And one of the outstanding ones for me was another young man that was an average learner. But by the end of our program, the year, he also sat his Kenya national examination, that is the grade 12 exams. He was also one of the best with the A minus. And he joined university, a very prestigious one, and did actuarial science. So the long story short, I've had so many young men now and young ladies who are either medical doctors, business leaders, among others across board. But then when this also started going on well, I decided to also jump ship and also support the same colleagues now at the university level. So not so long ago, one of my colleagues that I was also mentoring was the best in this university's thesis was the best in the university. So I do that. But besides that, I also do executive coaching. I work with a lot of local and international executives. And it's been amazing how I've been able to just interact with these fellas and find a footing. I've been a board chair in 2 NGOs. One I just resigned in November because of my tight schedule. But it's amazing just how this has also given birth to what I'm currently doing. Because when people peruse through my profile, you will see that I connect investors or donors with investments destinations or startups. And so what I do is to actually determine what is it that is the interest of the investor and what is it that is the concern of the person who is seeking, the one we call an investee or the startup or the project owner. So basically that is what I do. So practically this is in response to what I would call the road, the end. It's not really the end of the road, but an answer to most of the guys who came to me or who come to me. What do I do with my training? What do I do with my skills? I have got this business idea. So I got a way of now saying, hey, good, when you got a business idea, you got to come, talk to us, share with us your pitch deck, and pitch to us, pitch to a team of colleagues, and then you are able to determine how to refer you to a corresponding investor. Right. Thank you, Alan.
Well, George, that's fantastic. And it strikes me that there can't be many jobs that are as rewarding as when you see somebody who was previously performing at a very low level and then through the work with you suddenly is then performing at a very high level and will remember you for the rest of their life.
Yeah. I've had not so long ago, actually about 3 former students. I met one of them, a young lady, and she told me, I must buy you something today in a restaurant. I know you can afford, but I just want to buy out of love. I met another young man who also told me, when I met him in the restaurant, said, hey, I just want to buy you stuff. You supported me, and today look at where I am. And so really, Helen, is so fulfilling. I mean, actually, I should make this correction. That a lot of this has not been so much about payment. It all started just as a passion. A lot of this work we do is, just going out of our way to see how people can become better.
Yeah, I mean, there's a parallel there with the way that I work, because I think sometimes when we're guided by finance and strongly guided by finance, we end up making bad choices, actually, because instead of that, it works out better when you're guided by what's important to you and what you're passionate about, or I would say your values, and then kind of work the money thing out in a secondary way rather than allow it to lead. And there's a phrase actually that I've used for a number of years now, which is pay more disrespect to money, which really helps to do that. And actually where that came from was, when was the world, do you know when the World Cup was in Brazil? Was it 2014, maybe, something like that? And when I was a kid, the first Brazil team that I was aware of was the 1970 World Cup team, which I don't know how old you are, George, but that team had Pelé and Gerson and Jairzinho and just fantastic football players. And when we used to play football, when we finished, we would then play Brazil style for 20 minutes, when you would do all your tricks and flicks and fancy stuff. And so anyway, when the World Cup was in Brazil, I decided that I should go because that was what inspired me to love football for all of my life. So I told my family, and then my son, who was then 17, after a couple of weeks, it wasn't immediately, he came to me and he said, could I come with you as well? And I said, well, I can't afford to pay for you as well. So how much would you be willing to contribute? And he had a job on a Saturday and on a Thursday evening. So he thought about it for a while and then told me. And so we went together. And yeah, it cost money that, could have been spent on other things. But actually, the memories that we had of that 2 weeks that we spent was just priceless. So that's a bit of a long-winded way of explaining why I pay more disrespect to money. And just like you were saying, you didn't start this to earn money. You started it to provide a service to those people that you felt you could and you felt they would benefit from, which they absolutely have done. All right, so we've digressed already, but let's get into the Values Jam. Here is the Values Jam card deck. And what I'm going to do is ask you how many times you'd like me to cut the deck, George.
Let's see, about 3 times.
3 times. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to have 4 piles in front of me. So would you like pile number 1, 2, 3, or 4?
Number 4.
Number 4. And now we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 cards. So which number between 1 and 12?
12.
12. Okay, so this is the card that you've chosen, independence. So the first question is this: what does independence mean to you? And what does it look, feel, and sound like? So what does independence mean, George?
Well, independence for me is it actually originates from what I would call being assertive, just being able to do things, support people, and go out of your way to do things in a manner that would add value, with that kind of internal motivation where one does not have to be followed. So from our African perspective, which I would want to really borrow a leaf, in the independence for us means different things, because I presume like from the West, it could mean like somebody, doing things his own way or stuff like that. But for me, being independent in our context is really providing leadership, providing guidance, providing, wherever you are able to make things work in a manner that when people come after you, they're able to also find their footing. So I look at it more of that, and I've seen that really quite work well for me. Like there are times I found myself going into tasks that were extremely challenging. Like one of them was when around the same time after high school, I was elected as a project manager of an organization, and I was replacing a very renowned engineer. And I learned well to work with others, but I also learned the element of being independent, especially in providing what I would call leadership. But there are times that you need to listen to people give their opinions, but then there are times that I had to learn very fast that I'm now the one who is on the driver's seat. So I look at it that way, Alan, is that a very fulfilling element of, making things work without necessarily being rude, without being bossy.
Yeah, I think of it as I guess when I hear the word independence, I automatically think of dependence in order to explore independence. So, dependence is when you rely on other people for things to happen, and you're not in control, or you don't have so much input. It's, everything is being done and you're on the receiving end of it. Whereas when you're independent, that is not there. And so I feel a kind of sense of freedom when you're independent. So you're not relying on other people. Other people are not just telling you what to do and you're following. So from that point of view, it feels really good. But I like what you said about sometimes it's time to listen, because actually some people suffer from being too independent and not realizing the power of interdependence, when you can give to others and others can give to you, and everybody feels comfortable with that. So, okay. So from a metaphor point of view, what does, when you think of independence, what image comes to mind, or what sound comes to mind, or what does it feel like?
It feels to me like somebody that is, driving a vehicle as a driver and, having so many passengers with you. And in our community, I'm not sure whether you have that in the UK, you can actually sleep because you say professional driver is in control. So to me, it's an idea of having this professional drive. And I like what you said about, you cannot be independent before you're dependent. So one can only be a professional driver in control when you have gone through some element of training. And this training, one must have also actually gone and become certified. So I look at it as a driver in the driver's seat. You have got the best drivers, but of course, being one driver at a time. And for me, it also means that before you just begin driving, having people within the vehicle and making inquiries, just how does this work and how does this doesn't work. But then eventually, when I'm on the driver's seat, I am in charge, not necessarily being rude, very focused, because we have a destination. If I need to take a break, well, but I need to deliver you to your destination on time and in good shape.
Yeah. And when you're talking about that example, actually, it makes me realize how independence is kind of almost on a scale or a continuum. And at one end, like in the example you've given, the passengers are dependent on you, the driver, right? And so you're more independent than them. But if you're, like you said, you're taking them to a destination, you've been told to take them to the destination. Somebody, you're not independent. You can't go anywhere you want if you're taking them to a particular place. So the amount of independence is limited in certain situations. And I guess it's about independence is about the degree to which you have freedom in a given situation, because none of us are totally independent. And none of us are totally, or maybe a very small baby, I guess, is the example I can think of where they are totally dependent. And the image that comes to mind for me when I think about independence is a bird just flying free. But even then, they are not totally free because they can't fly forever before they land somewhere. They need food. And so again, I wonder who might be the example of if I was to say to you, give me an example of the best example of independence, what would that be?
We talked about I look at it like when the Africans were clamoring for freedom. I was watching a Mau Mau general, the only surviving one, and that really intrigued me, how they work together as a team. And they're working as a team, but with the resolve of getting people freedom. And I'm looking at that as a very interesting one, where you're looking at a team, but then each one of them as a general is a common cause, but also working so hard to make sure that you get it. So when we got the freedom as Africans, or when we get it, I think that metaphor comes to me. And that reminds me, when we got independence, then one of the things that came to us is that we were to be prepared. There was a process that the Africans had to go through. There were lots of negotiations, there were lots of retraining, and there were lots of what I would call skilling and upskilling and cross-skilling. And eventually, what you say actually makes sense is that independence came with the responsibility. So every time, even as I talk with you today, when you talk to us as Africans or any country that was colonized, it is not just the freedom, but it's about responsibility. And you keep on reminding countrymen, hey, George, it is not just that you are a president today, no, or whoever, you are not just the chairman, but remember, there is a responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, it's reminded me of another example of where independence sounds exciting. And I don't know why this example has popped into my head, but it's kind of reminded me of a time when I was responsible for innovation within a business. And at the beginning, it was about getting people excited, about innovation, and we're going to contribute new ideas and all of this sort of thing. But of course, what happens is that in order for that to be sustainable, you need to put in place process. And then I noticed quite quickly in that example that I'm referring to, people's excitement kind of disappeared because the process became the focus. And just as you described with liberation or independence of a country, the enthusiasm at the beginning then kind of gives way to the new regime, the new legislation, the new way things work. And then that becomes the focus. And I wonder, is there still a sense of excitement about independence, or is it forgotten and disappeared?
Right. I was talking to a young person that had just turned 18. And so usually the excitement, I'm not sure what age bracket is in UK, but in Kenya, when you turn 18, so you are an adult. So you say, I'm now independent, I can live on my own. And I keep on using this illustration, hey man, or lady, when now the police arrest you, you are over 18. So they will not be dealing with a child. They are going to deal with an adult. So you are independent, but remember that independence comes with another portion. Be careful about everything that you do. Your chances of negotiating as a minor just ceased on the day you turned 18. And I look at it, especially when I think about I'm going to live on my own. And I still get back to what you're saying. I'm independent in my own house, like or in my own office, but there are bills to be paid. There are things, in fact, when in the office where I am or the house where I live, the independence has got to do with being responsible if things go wrong with the people under my care. They call me and I have to take responsibility. So I like what you're saying, Alan. I mean, this thing about independence, I think our discussion has gone way, way off, where we look at it as being almost what in Kenya we call it something about our right, which you call in Kiswahili haki yetu. But you don't talk about a right without responsibility. Yeah. And so this is the kind of a thing that I think where we have lost. So when I'm talking about, we are talking about, I think a lot is going on in the international space about diversity, about equality, about inclusion, about stuff like that. But when you sit, you soon discover that all these things that we are saying are easier said, in theory. But when you get to real life, there has got to be a way within which we create an environment of human harmonious coexistence. And as you are talking, something came to me about the 3 P's that I would actually consider, that independence then has got something to do with people. It has got something to do with patterns, or maybe I would add it has got something to do with the process. It has got something again to do with the product. So there is a continuum, as you rightfully say.
Yeah, so let's move to another question. Where have you noticed a lack of independence?
Let me go straight on to my area of social innovation. Lack of independence. We were colonized as Africans, and even though we talk about independence, I still realize that a lot of us have not understood our place in terms of value proposition, in terms like the nature of my work, as I said before, is that I bridge the gap between investors and communities. And one area that I realized that in most of the times about when we get into candid discussions, most people don't want to say, Alan, what you are telling us is not going to work in our context. But we still want to talk about the big man or the big woman syndrome. I said, yes, sir, yes, madam. And you and I know very well that in the international space or in the corporate space, in every CEO or president would be excited about people who are able to talk to you respectfully, but they give you honest feedback about possibilities and impossibilities. Also, we talked about a driver. Why would you want to drive people into a lake? Because chances are you may not even survive. And even if you survive, you will be having a very bad record the rest of your life. So for me, that is a very interesting demonstration of where we are exercising what I call lack of independence, that we actually are then becoming, it is called what I call a facade of independence, because genuine independence is where you are factual, you are respectful, and we go back to what we said, you must remember this responsibility. Because if I told you, Alan, I need 10,000 US dollars, I then actually know that that 10,000 is little or is less of the actual budget, you and I are likely to fail. So we are going to have a bad blood. George, you said you needed 10,000. And then here I am back home. I realize 10,000 is not enough. Where do I raise more money? So we use this now in my area of practice in terms of resource mobilization, that under asking is as worse as over asking.
Yeah. And so my example of lack of independence, it's when I used to work as a part of a service partner organization, and our service was to look after the corporate offices of one of the big four banks in the UK. And we wanted to do things that were just progressive, really. And I remember the middle management level that we were dealing with in this large bank really getting in the way of everything that we wanted to do that was, you know, kind of a bit more adventurous. And I remember referring to these guys as the quicksand kids, because it felt like dealing with quicksand, you know, that every opportunity it was, oh, well, let's have another meeting about this. Let's recreate a new terms of reference. And it was all slow and not exciting and really bureaucratic. And it strikes me that those guys were totally lacking in independence. You know, they were just a slave to their system, which was really sad to see. Very tough to deal with as well, actually, because the system, when you have people like that, it becomes very strong and difficult to break through. Yeah, so that's my example of lack of independence. The other thing that you made me think of when you were talking there was you talked earlier about inclusion and diversity. And on this topic of independence, I'm thinking of the people that I've worked with in the past, and it feels, and I'm interested in your view about this, that men attach more importance to independence than women. And this might be controversial, but it feels that women are far more mature in this space than the men that I've known. And I'm just interested to compare experiences there.
You know, from where I come from in terms of community development, we talk about the model of a man and a woman in a marital setting or a marital setup. Okay. And there is the philosophy that the man is the head. And so being the head, you have to be independent. But I like the model that the head cannot do without the body. So the body in our case would be the woman. And so I actually realized that if we were to look at this in terms of proper, societal integration, is to look at it that could it be the element of then talking about the man being independent, but could also that it has become an oxymoron that the independence of man then has also created an element of pride, an element of arrogance, where you trash people, you don't listen to the woman, or even if you are the same man in an institution, I am the man. And now you are bringing me back to our African culture, the patriarchal society. And I'm told, or rather was told when I was growing up, there is this thing, I'm not sure how much you remember this, but in Africa, there is always the central pillar. And when you are building a house, that comes from the traditional, although we have beams today in the modern houses, but in the African traditional house, there used to be one big pillar. And that big pillar is what actually made the house stand. And so when a young man is growing up in Africa, you are told that you are that pillar. So as a boy, as a man, you are the pillar. So there is a positive side to it that has made me mature in many areas, where I see that level of independence as a sign of also providing leadership. But then I also see how it is a struggle in the sense that you can easily overstep even good people within your leadership domain by rather forsaking very important, feedbacks, very important leadership traits. You remember something is coming to my mind, that when you're talking about SDG 17, about partnership, I'm sure that the crafters must have thought about so many people, so many things going together. But it's until you have this kind of interrelationship is when you can actually talk about the realization of all the SDGs. And so a very interesting one when I look at that. And then, of course, then let me go to the other one, how it has affected us in society. Today, we are talking about the extreme, I'm not sure how to reframe it, but then thinking about the man was very strong. Then we also overemphasize or now empowering the girl child. So we are now having men who don't know how to lead, men who don't know how to be what we are saying. And so what we're having right now is a crisis. In fact, I have colleagues, I'm not sure to what extent you are investing in this, but we are having colleagues who are investing in now empowering, even though from my university, they are not talking to me about co-empowerment, where we strengthen each party so that you work together to achieve, common goal, rather than just making somebody strong and then others are failing. I think what the development caucuses have done was more of empowerment as opposed to co-empowerment. So there is a shift right now where a man, on a lighter note, there is a joke in Africa that as a man, you're supposed to be the one to respond to a caller at the door or at the gate. But then they say that the modern man asks the wife, please go and check who is knocking at the door or at the gate.
And how does that extend in your society around the education of young girls? Because, independence is a very important trait for people to have as they're growing up and as they strive to become a professional and lead a fulfilling life. So how is that playing out in your society?
What I've learned is that the roles have changed dramatically in the postmodern era. And so at one point, we just need to understand the functions and then stand up to be counted when we need to provide leadership, which goes with independence. So if it's the lady, we actually train them. I work with people across board. So I work with young people, and this is what I tell each party when you come to our program. Hey, going back to the patriarchal society, young men tell me, hey, how can a girl beat you in class? And so then the girls are told by their fellow, by the others, hey, we must beat this man. And so to a great extent, then how do I provide a middle ground of talking to, say, for example, my daughter, who was an average performer, but actually became a good performer? One of the things I learned to talk to her, because, Alan, when we talk about this thing about diversity, equality and inclusion, we forget that we have sisters, we have wives, we have brothers, and at one point we come home, like you are a parent or a grandparent, and you meet all these guys under your roof. So who do you want to exclude? I mean, they all belong together. So then I keep realizing this is how I bridge that gap. How do we come together by even performing certain tasks together? And then you have a winner, but then we are not only going to celebrate one element of victory, but we are also able to celebrate that if I did not cook, I'm sure my daughter would not be annoyed, and the other younger one, a friend of ours, when our daughter performed well, sent us money to buy a chicken. And then this friend is a humorous one, said, George, you, madam, and the young girl should not eat the chicken, just drink soup. And then my younger daughter, interrupted. Well, we also helped our sister because I used to wash plates during our studies. And so we gave a time. And so I am looking at how then this has been easier for me, and easier not because it is easy to achieve, but then making people see that at some point we all belong together to one life. Where we all need to do is to actually fight for opportunities to contribute value rather than devaluing others, provide value, because you will be remembered so much for how you change lives. And what comes to my mind again before you interject is something that I read some years back of a gentleman in the US that wrote something that somebody went and there was a tombstone. And then he wrote something that just as I was, so you are. And another time somebody walked into the same place and said, I was, and sorry, so follow me. So somebody came years later and said, I will only follow you if I know where you went. So I think we really have to redefine telling people that we have got a common journey, and this common journey, we add value to one another. So it is not about the Kenyans have a Kiswahili word called ubabe, which simply means, you are superior, I'm superior. Not necessarily, it's about contributing to value.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's coming through here for me is that independence is fine and good if handled with care, because there are other things that are more important. And like you've touched on, this interdependence, codependence, however you want to call it, and the realization that you're part of something bigger. So, independence in a country, for instance, can lead to patriotism and not wanting people in your country, a very exclusive attitude, and all of those things could be really bad. So it happens quite often with these conversations that we come to realize that overplaying the strength can lead to a really bad place. And often the answer is this two elements, actually. One is balance, but two, it strikes me that there's something about maturity and wisdom, because independence, I think of the young people, like you were saying earlier, it's the young person at home. I don't want to be dependent on my parents. I want independence, but not having really much of an idea about what is involved in terms of what you said about responsibility, or whether that person has the capability to deal with the situation that they're going to go into. And similarly with a country, it's easy to get people excited about independence, but then what happens when whoever was providing the resources that provided them previously is gone, and they're left on their own to fend for themselves? And it's this final point before we move on to another question. I suppose it is this thing around the world is grey, it's not black and white. And so independence might or might not be a good thing. It might or might not be a bad thing. It's kind of, there will be good things about it and there will be less good things about it. Yeah, so it's really fascinating when you start to unpack what is such a, it's on the face of it, independence is a simple word, right? But we've just spoken for 40 minutes about it, exploring it and looking under the stones. In ValuesJam, there's the opportunity to create your own question as well. So that's what I'd like to invite you to do now. So ask your own question about independence, which can begin with who, what, where, when, why, or how.
What does independence mean to me in my family?
Okay, so would you like to answer your own question first, or shall I answer your question?
Please answer.
Okay, so independence to me in my family. So independence is something that I have strived to equip my children with a sense of, So not for them to feel that they can try things and explore things. So independence in that sense, and to be curious about what the possibilities are in that way, rather than, you know, I'm at home, I have to do what my parents tell me, and that kind of approach. But probably on the other side of that coin, so by the way, I have 4 children, they're all grown up. So between the ages of 31 and 26. So they get on really, really well together. And so my youngest son was here. We watched the football last night. Him and my eldest boy, at the last weekend, we went to see my stepfather and we helped him clear his back garden. There was a family get together a couple of weeks ago because my eldest daughter had twins, twin girls in December. And so I think there is a really strong sense of interdependence. And what you're making me realize is that the two can actually coexist. They're not in competition with each other. Yeah, so that's my view of independence in my family. One other thing, I guess I have looked to create as much financial independence for me as I can. And that's not to say to be wealthy, but to not have to worry about being able to afford shelter, food, being safe, that sort of thing. What does independence look like for you in your family?
Right. Independence for me forms the basis of what I've been doing with young people all along, because I found out in terms of good performance that there is the element of, the role of the family as the first area where we model behavior. And so for me, it includes being what would I call, being vulnerable, where I try as an adult or even as a man to hide, but then at times that things are not good. Maybe you have not just paid this bill on time, maybe you're unwell, maybe this. And I realize that there's the element of sometimes just bringing some of these discussions when children are around, to also let them see the two sides of the coin, that there will be light and darkness, there will be cold and heat. And so in life, I don't want to model this kind of false, arrival where we pretend to be very strong. Mom and dad, we are doing very well in everything. And I look at how we draw strength from, or synergies, from the moments of you didn't make it last time, but there is always room for becoming the better. You keep on becoming better, improving. In fact, our daughter gave us a testimony, kept on telling her that as mom and dad, we believe in God, but we also believe in you. You also believe in yourself, that you have the potential not just to break records, and the sky is never the limit. And I remember this kid was reminding us that she reviewed, reflected on those words, and saw herself as the champion. In fact, the one that is called above standard, and every time she walked around and walked around tough, we kept on telling her, you have your own targets. When you realize you have not performed to what you expected, there is no room to cry over spilled milk. There is always another day to fight. And I look at that for me as providing a genuine and an honest environment, because Alan, I think your age and my age, I'm 46 today, and I think there is a lot of lies about what we watch on movies, and people are actors. There's so many actors in life. And so you keep on a lighter note, just like some of my friends from the West, I school in a university where there's so many colleagues from Europe and US. And so they kept on calling me the smartest students in the university who used to wear a suit. And so they kept on asking me, where do you get your suits from? Do you sleep in these suits? And I realized that sometimes we can portray that kind of false illusion, that I'm just a smart guy, a strong parent, a strong husband, a great father, and everybody, there is a lot of pressure of trying to be that great. And even when, Alan, you refine that great, so what is that greatness? It is still also very elusive. What do you call a great man? Is he the one who has gone to the gym? Is he the one that is driving some big car? You can't really quite. It's so relative defining that greatness. And my wife and I are learning that with the time to model this and to also let children know, and even ourselves, that out there is always somebody that is ahead of us. But that does not mean that we are the least in society. We just need to be real. We just need to be ourselves. But we must also keep on realizing that time and seasons happens to all. But then what is then our responsibility before we blame others, which is something that I really want to emphasize. Alan, a lot of us blame so many people about our failures, about our challenges. And so for me, it is also taking charge, not necessarily being rude, but also not even being complacent, but also just taking charge and celebrating those small wins. And I need to really interject and say this. I've learned over the years when I talk with students at all levels and even to myself, celebrating the small wins. My professor taught me in the university that if today at a deadline and maybe there's an exam, I had wanted to get a 90 and I get maybe 70, I don't need to wait for somebody to take me out. I just need to go and take coffee and say, George, you have made it. And I will surpass my 90 mark.
Yeah, and it's I think what's coming through here for me is that actually true independence is achieved when you are yourself and you're very confident that yourself is good enough and you're not striving to somebody else's agenda. And the way that I describe that is having clarity around your values and then living in line with those values and accepting that, when something happens, it doesn't have to be judged as good or bad. It's just happened. And as a result of what has happened, you might make some choices or some decisions, and then something else will happen. That's how the world happens. But like you say, I think so many people get caught up in this really judgmental way of describing something as success or failure. But the important part that you also mentioned, I think, is not becoming complacent, because whilst I attach less importance to success and failure, because I think those words have a lot of baggage to them. And, whose view of success are we talking about? Whose view of failure are we talking about? But at the same time, I still believe that you can have a more balanced approach as long as you are still ambitious and are not complacent, because the risk otherwise is that, nothing matters. And then you just become apathetic and lost. So I'm landing on independence as when you really understand yourself, you're comfortable with that, like you said, you're vulnerable with other people, and it's good enough. So the Values Jam sessions, George, we always bring to a close with the same question, and it is this. So what are you encouraged to do differently about independence as a result of our conversation today?
To be more accommodative, and using that, clearly saying that, yes, I've been accommodative, but I want to be more accommodative. I want to develop more curiosity to learning, acquiring new skills, like the one we're having with you. I've had quite a lot of them. The first time I had one with some team from the US, I was the only one from Africa, and I got a feedback that I performed well. Last year, I was approached to contribute to a book, some 28 quotes, and they call it CEO 28. And so I'm looking at, being independent is also the terms you have used here. I want to rise above false humility. I want to rise above complacency. I want to rise above negative competition. I want to rise above pride. I want to rise above greed. Now, those to me would be, I know there could be many, but those are some of the vices that I'm just hoping that don't contain me, because otherwise then I would not rise above average.
And so one of the objectives of ValuesJam is for there to be a concrete difference and a positive one made. So I understand the sentiment of what you've just described there. And could you have a think about what is the first step in a practical way that you can take and describe towards what you've just described more generally?
One is to different levels of coaching or mentorship, where I have what used to be called GNLD model of marketing. You know, the upper line and down line. So I keep on looking at myself. How am I going upward in terms of reference to my upline? So there is always a standard, but a realistic standard. But I'm also focused on how do I bring people who are below me. Like right now, I just attained 11,000 followers on LinkedIn, which is a big accomplishment. I've now seen that I'm now respected. But every time I wake up, I realize that the people who are 3 million followers, others are 10 million. So I am finding a balance of not feeling like I'm nobody, but I keep on saying, using this illustration, there are people who are ahead of me. I'm not going to die because they're ahead of me. There are people who are below me. I want to be also honest enough also, because I've also learned to be very honest, that even the process of bringing people who are down, some can actually bring you down completely, because there must be the willpower. Somebody must be willing to go to the next level. So for me, it is also still reiterating my terms, looking at those who are ahead, inquiring about the secret of their, progress, and how I can also deliver to my people and to the global community, but at the same time, very cognizant about those who are around me who are also still struggling in one way or the other.
Okay. And mine is related to an initiative that is kind of just starting, actually. So it's called the Art of Values Showcase, and it is a visual arts initiative for people all over the world to express themselves around the topic of values. So it might be that somebody does a drawing about kindness or about independence or responsibility or whatever it is. So the stage that we're at the moment is that we are wanting to launch this, and I've got a call next week with a lady in America who is also looking to create something similar. And what I am wanting to do when I have that call is to be very open-minded about what the initiative looks like when we put our input together, rather than being too focused on it being what I think it is now. So up until this conversation, I think I was going to go into that call with a view of how can she support what I've got in my mind, whereas now on that call, I'm going to be more codependent and how can we create something together. So George, it's been a really thought-provoking conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time today. And you are now a values jammer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alan, for the time and the session. We'll be looking forward to another time of celebrating this great community social support.
Thanks, George.